All right. Hey, church. How are you today? It's good to be able to be sort of with you using technology and finding ways to be present, even when I'm not really present. Interesting that we're doing a video again. I had a dry run last week when we had our storm, and so it was almost like a little practice. Uh, you probably know this already, but next week is Palm Sunday, and then Easter. So we're coming right up to the end of the Lenten season. I hope that you have found ways to engage in the um, practices that we have talked about over the last few weeks, that you've found a way to engage in one or many of those. And if you haven't, then you still have a couple weeks to try it, to give yourself an opportunity to fast or to try Lectio Divina, or to work with the beads. So there's still opportunities for you to engage in those things. Today, we are going to try to do a little bit more about hospitality. I know that we've already talked some about hospitality in my time with you, um, but we're going to spend a little bit more time, and we're actually going to come back around to hospitality again. Some of the reasons that we are doing that, all you all already know that we have a new renter that's coming into the basement, and that renter will encompass some different folks that we don't know, and that we whose practices and methods and behaviors we may not know, may be not entirely familiar with. And so I want to prepare us to be as welcoming and hospitable as we can be. I know that you all have already do this, but I'd love to engage in that conversation more as we can. Also, the school district is moving our renter out of their space because the school district is anticipating they will need that space. Therefore, it feels to me like we must be having an influx of additional people into the North Branch area, and so we need to plan for them as well. So we're going to think about that, and we are going to keep coming back to hospitality again as we move forward. As we move toward our new renters coming into the space, we're going to keep thinking about hospitality. So, just a reminder that we've grounded ourselves in that text from John chapter 15. And here, I'm just reminding you of verse 10 says, "If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love." And then I remind you again of a story that we read recently from Matthew chapter 25. Actually, you should have heard it this morning also, but we also read it not that long ago. It was Matthew chapter 25, verse 34. "Then the king will say to those on his right, 'Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world.'" And those are the ones who really, in so many ways, showed hospitality. So as we engage in this text, we're thinking about hospitality and how that might work. So you may or may not already know this, but in the ancient Near East, so in the time before Jesus' birth and into his time of life on earth, um, hospitality was um, a way of life of the the people. And one of the ways that they expressed hospitality, or they um, lived out hospitality, was if somebody showed up on your doorstep, you needed to take care of them, and that could be a complete stranger. It could have even been your enemies. Can you imagine your enemy showing up to your door today, whoever your enemy is? I don't know how you might think about that person or those people, but imagine your enemies showing up on your door, and you have to excuse me, take responsibility for them, pledge their safety and care for them while they are under your roof or in your on your property, in your space. So think about how that might affect you or us today. Um, yeah, so it was safe passage that you promised to that person, or that you were required to give. Uh, from Hebrews chapter 13, verse 2, do not forget to show hospitality to strangers, for by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels without knowing it. And that's another piece of this idea of um, this practice of hospitality, and being willing and able and offering hospitality to strangers, to those you don't even know. And this text reminds us, and the passage from Matthew 25 also reminds us, that as we do that, as we offer hospitality to strangers, we are in fact offering hospitality, to Jesus. And so that is our challenge. And the question then, or a question for us to think about, is that I could ask you, who are the strangers and the enemies in our midst? Um, and who are the people that we might think about? And Thompson suggests immigrants, or addicts, or those with mental illness, or people who differ from us in ethnic origin, religious conviction, or political affiliation. So as you think about who your enemies are, or who might seem to be a stranger to you, these are some of the people that you might be, or that Thompson might suggest that you think about. So as you think about what it is to entertain strangers, and in that way, to some accidentally, or to sometimes entertain Christ, I ask you this question: can you name an incident in your life where you felt you met Christ in the guise of a stranger? Can you name an incident in your life where you felt you met Christ in the guise of a stranger? And in order to facilitate this question, I'd like you to take a minute, and I'm gonna stop the video. I'd like you to take a minute, turn to a person or a couple of people who are near you in the circle, and have some conversation about that, if you're willing, and if you are able to tell a story about how you met Christ in the guise of a stranger. You'll have a minute or three. Thank you. I hope that your conversation about how you met Christ as a stranger, how you entertained an angel, how your conversations about that were fruitful, and that you found things to discuss. So the next thing for us to think about is how God shows hospitality. This continues on with Thompson's chapter. How God shows hospitality to us. And Thompson suggests that God shows hospitality to us in gift and grace, and two ways we might experience that are in creation and in incarnation. So, creation and incarnation. So think about God creates uh, the world, God makes all of creation and invites us into that created space. In some ways, God presents to us the creation that God has made. And many of the pieces of creation, if you remember the Garden of Eden story, the creation is begun, and it doesn't, nothing grows in it yet until God invites humans, into that created space. And then, because there's no one there to till it, so once there are human beings there, then God presents the human beings with this whole garden space and says to those human beings, come and inhabit this space. Um, know these plants and know these animals and be a part of this created space, this space that I made. And all of the things in this space, the plants are good, the ones that are good for food, you're welcome to eat, with the exception of the one. And so God gives to us in so many ways, gives to us creation, or invites us into the created space that God has made. Now, of course, we fail in caring for it, and we fail in recognizing how God gives us the hospitality in that space, and we, in our way, want to take control of that space and not allow it to be God's space. But God invites us into that space, and I think God continues to invite us into that space, and so that's one way that God shows hospitality to us. The second way that Thompson mentions that God shows hospitality to us is in the incarnation. So Christ comes, Emmanuel, God with us. Christ comes actually into our space, in some ways, into enemy territory. Christ comes showing us this amazing hospitality of coming into the space where we are, and sharing that space with us. And so we experience God's hospitality in that way also. And there's something deep for us really to think about as God shows us, as God shows up. Incarnation with flesh in the space that we inhabit. And then once we have received, or once we have God has shown hospitality to us, then we have the opportunity, actually, amazingly, to show hospitality also to God. And the way we might do that, Thompson calls receptivity and response. So, how we show hospitality to God is we receive what God offers. So God gives us a gift of grace, and the fact that we receive it is one way that we show hospitality to God. It's the way that sometimes it's very hard for us to accept hospitality given and shown to us. And in so many ways, even Jesus, in as the incarnate God, will go to somebody else's house, right? He's accused often of going and eating with tax collectors and sinners. Jesus goes into their space and accepts hospitality from them and shows us the example of how it is, how we might accept hospitality from God. So to receive what God has offered is one way that we show hospitality. And then second, we choose to listen to God. So we choose to be attentive to God. We were talking, as we talk about the various practices that we have talked about, one of the ways that we enter into those practices, prayer practice particularly, but that's not the only one. One of the ways we enter into that prayer practice is we recognize that we are not by ourselves, that we are not praying in a vacuum, but instead we are attentive to God and listening to what God may be saying to us, and not only listening, but doing as God commands, God asks. God directs us. And so that's the second way that we might show hospitality to God. One, we receive the gift that God gives to us, and two, we choose to listen and do what God asks us, commands us to do. So, another question that I would like to ask you and give you a moment for is, what is the place of gratitude in your own spiritual journey right now? What's the place of gratitude in your own spiritual journey right now? And again, I'll give you an opportunity to turn to maybe the same small group, or maybe find a different small group, a couple, one or two other people, and have some conversation about gratitude and how you're doing that in your spiritual journey. So I'd like to bring you back after your conversation about gratitude, about receiving God's hospitality, about how we then show hospitality back to God, receiving that gift, and being grateful, being again, showing God gratitude. And I'd like you to move on a little bit. So Thompson suggests that hospitality means giving all guests the freedom to reveal themselves as they choose. Hospitality means giving all guests the freedom to reveal themselves as they choose. And freedom is the medium of human exchange in true hospitality. So, true hospitality looks like um, uh, freely allowing people to express themselves or to reveal themselves as they are. Parker Palmer even goes on, Parker Palmer, the author, goes on and says, hospitality means letting the stranger remain a stranger while offering hospitality nonetheless. It means honoring the fact that strangers already have a relationship rooted in our common humanity without having to build one on intimate interpersonal knowledge, without having to become friends. And Thompson says that this perspective from Palmer goes against the grain of our North American culture. We tend to pride ourselves on being friendly and on making friends easily. And we also tend to see the world as divided into two camps, those people who are our friends and those who are our enemies. If others do not conform to our norms of friendship, we may find ourselves uncertain of how to navigate the relationship. So it's very challenging for us. We want to be able to make friends quickly and easily, and we want to be able to form those relationships. And we are particularly interested in forming friendships and relationships in our church family and in our church spaces. We want to welcome someone in, and we want to quickly build a relationship with them, a friendship. What Thompson and Palmer are cautioning or encouraging us is, we already have a commonality with someone who walks through the door, with someone whom we meet. We all already have a common humanity, and it is important for us to recognize that humanity and not force someone into a friendship or come on so strong, but also to make sure that people are welcome to show up as they are in our space and in our spaces, in God's space, really. But that is not incumbent upon them to show up the way we want them to show up, but the way they want to show up. To go one step farther on that, Elizabeth Canham, who's an Episcopal priest, says, we want to be here. We want to find Christ in the restless teenager, the demanding parent, the insensitive employee, the dull preacher, the lukewarm congregation. We need to create a hospitable space for whoever and whatever God sends into our lives now. a hospitable space for whoever and whatever God sends into our lives now. That right there is something I'd like for us to dwell deeply on. We need to engage in the creation of space that is hospitable to whoever and whatever God sends into our lives. I'd like to, as you think about that one, I'd like to offer another question for you, and that is, and I'm not there to hear your answers, so you can be as honest as you're able. How does our church make its own members welcome? So these are kind of two questions. How does our church make its own members welcome? So how have we reached out to each other to make each other feel welcome? What have we done to encourage everyone to feel welcome? How have we met the needs of the members of our congregation so that people feel welcome, ones who are already a part of the congregation? And then the second question is, how do we, or how might we, make strangers welcome? That means that we have to engage in, or we have to think about how we might create space, hospitable space for people we don't even know yet. So how do we think about how we do that? I'll give you again a few minutes to answer that question. So, do you have all the answers? I'd love to hear what you've come up with, how you have thought about the way that we are hospitable both to members who are already present and to those who have not yet entered into our space, those who are not yet here. At the moment, I'm particularly thinking about the staff and the families and the folks who will be connected to our renter organization. Now, they may or may not ever show up on a Sunday, but how are we preparing and making space so that they recognize that they are welcome in our building, welcome in the building that God has gifted to us? And what is it that we are doing there? So and we've been in thinking these weeks about spiritual practices, and my thought is, or the Thompson's thought is, that hospitality really is a spiritual practice, and so how we engage in it, how we engage in the act of hospitality, is one of the ways that we can practice our spirituality. And so then the question that I would send you off with today is, how might we as a church prepare to practice hospitality to welcome those who are not yet here? I'm noticing right now that I have a typo in there, but how might we as a church prepare to practice hospitality to welcome those who are not yet here? How can we engage in the practice of hospitality? How are we and how might we? And how, maybe even the hard question, how are we not, but how might we engage in that practice? And the idea, excuse me, as we, again, going back to our rooted text, as we remain in Christ, Christ remains in us. And so Christ practiced amazing hospitality, right? Pausing, inviting us in, remaining with us, regardless of what it is that we're going through or where we are, stepping into spaces that were not his own space. It's Jesus, every space is his own space, but stepping into, in so many ways, into enemy territory. And so Jesus invites us in the same way to experience hospitality from him. And so how do we then show the same hospitality that he showed to us? How do we show that to others? Blessings on you, my friends. Amen.